Hi, my name is Dr. Sofia Lemariaga, and I teach and I play in the Virginia area. I came across Paul Rolland probably a long time ago. I first saw mention of Paul Rolland in violinist.com when somebody was mentioning different pedagogy workshops, and Suzuki was recommended, as well as Mimi Zweig and Paul Rolland. I came across Paul Rolland again years later because I needed to change my setup. I was using a shoulder rest, the wrong chin rest, and in order to be able to play more the way I wanted to play, I really needed to find something that worked better for me. So I went to chinrest.com. I had a fitting with Lynn Denig, and she recommended that I attend a Paul Rolland workshop. I actually didn't go to Paul Rolland's workshop immediately, but I went to Mimi Zweig's violin and viola retreat, and Paul Rolland pedagogy is central to what Mimi Zweig does as well. The year after, I finally went to a Paul Rolland workshop, and I learned a lot and met some really nice people, and I've been going to Paul Rolland workshops ever since. I think Paul Rolland pedagogy can really help a lot of people avoid injury, play with a better sound, and with more ease and freedom. And that is something I would like to pass along. In this video, I'm going to be exploring some preliminary topics to bowing, including total body action, balance, setup, and an exercise called flying pizzicato. And I think these topics really help to clarify and ensure success in young beginners and remedial advanced students alike when it comes to bowing. The first thing that we're going to talk about is total body action. Total body action is a cornerstone of Paul Rolland pedagogy. He did not just consider a left or right hand technique, but an entire body technique. When you see a pitcher throw a baseball, you might notice that the motion is not just done with the arm like this. The entire body participates in balancing and sympathetic motion. And the same thing happens when we bow, like this. In order to have total body action, we need to be balanced as we are standing or sitting. Balanced objects move with minimal effort. Imbalanced bodies require excessive muscular tension, and this restricts freedom of movement and breathing. In an aligned and balanced body, the ankles, the knee joints, which are behind the kneecaps, the hips, the hip joints, the shoulders, and the atlanto-occipital joint, we'll get to what that is in a second, those things are aligned. A cool trick that I learned from violinist and body mapping expert Jennifer Johnson is walking backwards, and in order to find alignment. And the reason this works is that we don't usually have habits walking backwards. It's not something that we do every day. And also, walking backwards can tend to make us feel like we're a little out of balance, and so the body naturally corrects that by finding alignment. In order to do this, and you can do this along with me, you will want to have enough room behind you to walk 4 steps. They don't have to be huge steps. And we want to walk at a rapid pace like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. And walking at a rapid pace, or marching, just bypasses any overthinking that we can tend to do. You can even take your right hand and place the back of it, not the front of it, on your lower back, and just see if anything changes from when you first start to your penultimate step. And because by the time we take the ultimate step, sometimes I find that students can automatically revert back to their old habits. So let's give this a try. I'm going to be close, and then I'm going to walk backwards or march backwards rapidly. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I already feel taller. You might notice that my voice has opened up because I'm getting more oxygen. My ribs are no longer occupied in trying to hold my skeleton up. And I feel a little slightly forward of where I was standing before. And my back is just a little less arched. So you might make those types of observations yourself. You might notice when you're aligned, your ankles, your knees, your hip joints are really soft. They're unlocked. My knees are ever so slightly bent. Also, your head will be balanced on top of your atlanto-occipital joint. The atlanto-occipital joint is located where your spine ends and where your skull rests on top of your spine. And you can find this by taking your 2 index fingers, and you're going to want to point them towards each other such that they are parallel to the ground. And then you're going to find these bony protrusions behind your ears. These are called your mastoid bones. And in between where your index fingers are pointing is where, right in the middle of your skull, is going to be where your atlanto-occipital joint is. And in order to have balance, your skull balance on top of your atlanto-occipital joint, you'll need to also have a slight gap between your teeth. A relaxed jaw is one that is slightly open. So we have a lower jaw, and the upper jaw is actually part of your skull. So in body mapping, it's not really considered the upper jaw, but it's just part of your skull. But so teeth slightly open, and go ahead and nod from your atlanto-occipital joint. It's called AO joint for short. And when we nod from our AO joint, the back of the head actually goes up when we nod down. If we are nodding from anywhere else on our neck, the back of the head will actually go down, or if we're nodding too far. So make sure, and you can even put one hand on the back of your head and nod. So it's like a seesaw. The chin goes down, the back of the head goes up, and vice versa. Another thing that we have to be mindful of in order to have freedom of movement and total body action is our breathing. Our breathing is so important for so many things. It gives us life, vitality, confidence, concentration, helps us keep us awake in rehearsals. So we want to be mindful of our breathing. An exercise that you can do, and this will help to engage the parasympathetic system as well, is to do what we call diaphragmatic breathing. So you can place your one hand on your diaphragm here, on your belly here, and you can just breathe in for 4 counts, and then breathe out for 4 counts. So this exercise is something that you can just practice every day to increase your awareness of your breathing, because not breathing actually tenses our whole body. So we don't want to do that. One of the biggest things that we can do to relieve excessive tension is to breathe. And you'd be surprised at how much it can improve accuracy, rhythm, all sorts of things. Many of us sit in orchestra or lower strings, cellos, basses. Sometimes we'll sit down. And so let's talk about sitting. You want to have a chair that is either flat or slightly sloping forward. You do not want a chair that slopes back because you want your knees to be either level with your hips, or my preference is to have my knees lower than my hips. And you want to be able to stand at any point that you're sitting. So you sit as if you are going to stand at any moment. And exercise that Paul Rolland liked to do was, he called it the fire drill, and you simply sit down and stand up in rapid succession. The idea is that now you're balanced on your feet and your sit bones. Just like we were balanced on our feet when we were standing, when we're sitting, we're balanced on our sit bones. In order to find your sit bones, you can locate your AO joint again with the slightly open jaw, and go ahead and lean forward and lean back. You might notice if I lean back too hard, then my head nods forward. The back of my head actually goes down. If I lean too far forward, the back of my head goes back. There's a midpoint at which my skull can just rest on top of my AO joint, and that's about here. And I found my sit bones. When we're sitting or standing, we are moving on a stationary base. There's no such thing as standing still or sitting still. We are breathing human beings, and so as we breathe or sit, there is something that we call postural sway that happens naturally. So let's talk about setup, because we have to be able to hold our instruments without excessive muscular tension. When we're aligned, we're using our deep core muscles to hold ourselves up, freeing the superficial muscles to do their job, which is solely to move. The freer our superficial muscles, the more correctly our bow arms are going to move, and the freer our sound is going to be. It's very rare that we have to work harder to produce a more beautiful sound. Usually as we get to higher and higher levels, we're doing that by optimizing further and eliminating more and more little tiny sources of tension. So to start with, let's just remove anything that we have attached to our instruments, including shoulder rests. You can always put that back on later, but let's start from ground zero to assess what our needs are going to be with regards to our setup. We're going to march up and down, knees bent to 90 degrees so that our feet fall shoulder width apart. This gives us a balance of being flexible and stable at the same time. Too far apart, it's very hard to move. Too close together, we don't really have much stability, so sort of shoulder width apart. And we're going to place all 4 fingers on the G string in 4th position. We're going to take our index finger and place it on the button. We're also going to nod up and down from the AO joint, which means we have to have our jaws ever so slightly open. We're going to reach out our arms over the left foot, what Paul Rolland liked to call the Statue of Liberty. We're going to flip our violins upside down and keep nodding. Also, you can keep marching. And then we're going to place our violin onto the collarbone like this. So there are a few components to what we just did. Let's talk about why we place our fingers in 4th position. So this enables us to find the correct angle for our instrument. So I can place my scroll to the right such that it's right in front of me, and this enables my bow arm to reach the tip. But this is not ideal for the left arm, which then has to come around excessively far in order to reach the high positions. Now if I direct my scroll over to the left here, I can no longer reach the tip. Of course, it's easier to reach the higher positions with my left arm. And placing your fingers in 4th position and your violin on your index finger on your button, enables you to find a nice balance between being able to reach and being able to access the higher positions. Okay, so we also nod up and down in order to assess our needs for height in between the collarbone and the jaw. So again, you want to nod with your jaw slightly open because it's impossible to find the balance on top of your AO joint if your jaw is clenched. And you want to be able to nod a full yes. At the bottom of my yes, you can see that the back of my head has still gone up, it has not gone down. If the back of your head is going down, you want to assess whether you are correctly nodding from your AO joint, of course. But if you have not enough material in between your collarbone and your jaw, then that can cause the back of the head to go forward, and that we don't want that. So that may mean that you need a higher chin rest, or usually a higher chin rest, and maybe just a little bit padding below. It's advisable to add material on top of your instrument rather than below your instrument, because you do not want to be working really hard with your bow arm. It's very natural to have your bow arm very high like this, and having a higher chin rest allows your violin to stay low and makes playing like spiccato at the frog much easier, and allows our hands to stay about mouth level, which is an everyday activity that we do. We don't really have any other activities where we're lifting our hands above our mouths, maybe to wash your hair, but then your elbows down here, which is not where you want to, not what you want for your bow arm. So a higher chin rest rather than a high shoulder rest is going to be healthier for your bow arm. Now, if your yes is a little bit constricted, like you're not nodding a full yes, that's also not healthy. You might get headaches eventually if you have too much material here. And I think that's usually the first mistake people will make, is to add too much material. But you don't need much. I am just at the bottom of my yes, I'm just softly touching the bottom of my chin rest. You also want to look into a chin rest that is a shape that fits your face and has a little bit of a lip on it, so that instead of bearing down into the chin rest to secure it when you're shifting down, or you have some really wide, crazy vibrato, that you're not trying to secure it by pressing your head down or your shoulders up, that it's more of this inward nod that secures your instrument. You can go to chinrest.com to learn about getting fitted for a custom chin rest. I recommend it. It saves a lot of time actually, and money in the long run if you are going to buy boxes and boxes of shoulder rests and chin rests. Just skip all that, and or at least consider getting fitted, and or at least visit the website to just look around and be more informed of your options. In Canada, you have Peter Purick, who also makes custom chin rests. Some common mistakes when it comes to setup. Again, we mentioned the number one mistake, which is to place too much material in between the collarbone and the jaw. We only need enough to nod a full yes and be able to hook onto the edge of the chin rest. Another common mistake is to always be holding your instrument hands-free like this between your shoulder and your jaw. We don't need to do that. I would say at least 95, if not more, % of the time. I am not using my head to secure the instrument at all. And there might be a little bit of friction between the skin of my jaw and the chin rest, but the work and holding my instrument is shared between my left hand, my collarbone, my jaw. I have two ways to secure the instrument. With my left hand, I can support with my thumb. I can also support with this bony protrusion on the side, on the index side of my hand, where we might, underneath where we might place our magic X. And this allows for me to have more information in order to play in tune and shift accurately, and allows my head to be free and function the way it naturally should, which is to have sympathetic movement, just like our head would be able to move freely when we walk around. And if we were to walk around like this all day, of course we would start to have pain. So we don't want to practice hours a day with our instrument held like this. Another common mistake that's related to that is to use the shoulder to hold the instrument like this. I don't need to use the shoulder. The shoulder doesn't even touch the back of my instrument. The contact point with the instrument is solely my collarbone and my jaw near my body, and my shoulder area is free to move because it needs to be able to move for shifting and vibrato. And again, my arm starts in my collarbone, so my collarbone needs to be free to move. And if I'm doing this, I can't move my collarbone anymore. And I will not be able to shift properly. When you shift your scapula and your collarbone, move forward and back. Another common mistake is to place the violin high up on the shoulder like this. It can give us the impression that this is more secure because you have a flat bit here at the top of your shoulder for the violin to rest, and it can also fill up this space here a little bit better. But this causes us to have to raise our bow arms, and I find that for spiccato at the frog, brushstrokes at the frog, this just doesn't work, because in order to get the sound that I want, then I really have to lift my arm and almost dislocate my shoulder in order to get the proper sound. Otherwise, I'll get a very crunchy sound. It's just not the right sound. So you want to make sure that the instrument is not on the top of this shoulder ridge here, but actually on the collarbone. So when I'm with my setup, I want to have some freedom to move my instrument, but not too much. I want a little bit of stability as well. And I use this tiny cosmetic sponge. I got it from Amazon. It's like $4, and this microfiber cleaning cloth, and I place it underneath just for stability so that my violin does not rock back and forth like this too much when I'm vibratoing. And it's not to help me secure the instrument, it's just for that little bit of stability, because when I place my violin on my collarbone, as it's just intersecting a tiny bit of my collarbone, without this, my violin tends to rock around a little bit too much. But this still allows me to be able to move my instrument. So when we bow, we're not just playing with the bow down into instrument, but we're playing with the violin support up and across the bow as well. So for example, if I'm playing on the G string, I might not want to put my arm up here. You know, if you're playing second violin and you just playing this for an entire opera, that's going to be really uncomfortable. So a better way to do that is to tilt your violin down this way so that you bring your G string to your right arm. Same thing for the E string. So if you do this, if your violin is sloped like this on the E string, gravity is not really helping you. So you want to flatten your instrument, and now any weight involved with your bow is going to go more, be directed down into the E string. Also, I can move my violin towards my frog, and also move it towards my tip. And this will help me if I want to do fast bow strokes. It will adjust so that my arm is not having to move really fast. I can share that work with my instrument. I can also get shorter at the frog because the frog is too heavy for our strings. So I can be shorter at the frog and taller at the tip. Just some good things to know. We'll get a little bit more into that in a bit. Next, let's take a look at mapping our arms. Most of us have misconceptions about our arms because we've all seen dolls in which the arm starts here and the arm spins around in this windmill-like fashion, but that's not how real human arms are constructed. You can map along with me and find the various bones that I'm referring to. So the arm doesn't start here. It actually starts at this bony protrusion at the end of my collarbone here. This is the first arm joint. This is called the sternoclavicular joint. And this is the only part of your arm that rests on your ribs. This is the only, everything else is just floating on top of soft tissue. There's blood vessels and nerves in there. And we'll get to more of that in a second. But here is where our arm starts. Then we come to our scapula in the back. So in the back, our arm also includes our scapula. It doesn't just stop here. We have our humerus, this big bone in between the elbow and what we might call our shoulder. On the thumb side, we have our radius. On the pinky side, we have the ulna. So we have two forearm bones, and the ulna rotates around the radius. This bony protrusion here is actually not a wrist, but this is the end of the forearm, what we might normally call the wrist, where you actually wear a watch. It's not actually the wrist, but the end of the forearm. The wrist consists of 8 bones, 2 rows of 4 bones that come immediately after your forearm ends and before your fingers begin. So you can kind of trace down the back of one of your fingers and just find where that bone ends. And that's pretty much, that's the space that is your wrist. And we're going to get to our fingers a little bit later when we talk about bow hold. But for now, we're just talking about our arm. And we're doing this in preparation for an exercise called flying pizzicato. And it's really important to know about what our arm consists of so that we can move freely the entire apparatus. And a lot of people who have mismapping in which the shoulder ends here tend to have limited motions like this. But if we are able to move from this first joint, our sternoclavicular joint, then we will have a much freer motion. So we know about the sternoclavicular joint, which is the main joint from which we move our arm. We also have a joint at the end of the collarbone, and that is called the acromioclavicular joint. And that joint, we actually cannot consciously move our bones independently of one another from that joint. So just good to know. So we talked a little bit about our breathing before. In order to breathe properly, we have to have what we call a floating upper arm area in which the arms do not sit on top of our ribs. That is something that we can get into the habit of doing because a common protective humans do is we hug our humeruses to our body like this whenever we get nervous or a little bit anxious. And you might notice that babies have a lot of space in this armpit area. So you can just try this. Take a fist and place it under your left fist, place it under your right armpit, and just let your right arm dangle over your left fist, and you can just lift up ever so slightly and feel that space in between your rib cage and your arm. You can do that on the other side as well. And you can, when you take away your hand, if you're reading a book, you can roll up a sock and just place it there just to regain any lost space that adults tend to have in this armpit area. But when you let go, you can even think of a book under the armpit, feeling the height of the book, kind of lifting the arms off the ribs. And that's really going to be important for being able to breathe and move the arm freely. So floating upper arm area, this means that the shoulders, you don't want the shoulders lifted up like this. Of course, you can try this and you can feel that the breathing is constricted. That is my first clue for any sign of tension, is my breathing. And yeah, so just let go of this until you feel all those muscles in your neck and your back just releasing. You also don't want to press your shoulders down. This is a little bit more common because, of course, most of us are trying in life, and you know that this is not appropriate. So a lot of people will do the opposite to be good soldiers and press their shoulders down. But this impedes blood flow. You have nerves and blood vessels there. It's common to have cold hands or poor circulation when your shoulders are pressed down like this. And you can notice my breathing again. My breathing is my biggest clue. So I'm just going to release all my muscles until I feel that my lungs are able to get a little bit more air. You can try this as well. And of course, I don't want to throw my shoulders forward like this. Again, you cannot breathe like this, right? Try it. When you feel these muscles, your pectoral muscles engaging, you can release those and just notice your breathing. That is my favorite way to notice if my body is in balance or not. And the more common way, of course, is to hold your shoulders back like this, because this is what a lot of people are taught, that you should hold your shoulders down and back, which is really not good for playing because it's very hard to move like this. You're engaging a lot of superficial muscles, and that's not their job. Their job is not to hold you in any sort of way, but their sole purpose is to move. And you can notice my breathing, it's not very good. I'm just going to release those back muscles until I can breathe again. So just an exploration in this floating upper arm structure, freeing the ribs and ultimately our bow arms, and of course our whole body, because it's a total body action. Next, let's take a look at the movement of our collarbone and our scapula. I think that the collarbone and scapula are not traditionally talked about, but they are so important because your main arm joint is actually at the end of your collarbone. So you can just take your left hand and place it on your right collarbone. And there are 3 ways that your collarbone and scapula move. That's forward and back, like this, forward and back, up and down. And then go ahead and make like a little cactus. You're gonna hold your arm at 90 degrees, and then you're just going to wave down and up. And so the 3rd way that your collarbone moves is that it rotates. And you can place your left hand on your right scapula and you notice the same 3 types of movement. So forward and back, up and down, and rotate. And you can do that on the other side too. So hand on the collarbone, forward, back, up and down, rotate. And then hand on the scapula, forward and back, up and down, rotate. This is going to be important because the collarbone moves quite a bit when we play. When we move to the frog, the collarbone moves up a little bit. Or when you are crossing strings, a lot of people tend to hold their shoulders down like this because they are imagining that their arms start here. And instead of being able to get the elbow to the correct position on a lower string, you sometimes see this where the bow moves, but the elbow is left behind on a lower string level. But in order to correct this, it's helpful to think of the collarbone moving up and down in order to be able to maintain the same relationship between the bow and the upper arm. And by the way, all this is called humerus scapular rhythm, where the humerus leads and the collarbone and the scapula follow. So now is a really cool Paul Rolland exercise because it is one of the first action studies that a student does in which they utilize the right arm and they are able to make a sound while engaging total body action. So flying pizzicato looks like this. And the reason why we do flying pizzicato is that it emulates exactly what the bow arm is going to do. So you might notice when I do flying pizzicato and I do an accelerated lengthened bow stroke, my balance is shifting from one foot to the other. I'm also playing with the support underneath my bow because my violin is allowed to move as well as my bow, increasing the bow speed. So if my bow is moving 2 miles an hour and my violin is moving also 2 miles per hour, I might get a 4 miles per hour bow stroke, as opposed to a motion in which the violin moves the same direction as my bow. So if my bow is moving 2 miles per hour and my violin is moving 1 mile per hour, then I end up with a 1 mile per hour bow stroke. But you can see that in this exercise, I am practicing an accelerated bow stroke. And this also helps me practice drawing a bow that's parallel to the bridge. And we want a bow that's parallel to the bridge because different sounding points are going to result in different tone colors and dynamics. So if I have a crooked bow, I'm going to get a decrescendo, or opposite. That's going to result in a glassier sound towards the tip or a louder sound. But I just want to practice bowing parallel to the bridge. Also, I am utilizing shorter and taller, so I'm a little bit shorter at the frog, a little bit taller at the tip, and my violin is also a little bit tilted when I need less weight, and flatter at the tip where I need gravity to be on my side. So that's just a preview of flying pizzicato, and I find that it's understand what the correct motion is. Let's just practice shifting the weight from one foot to the other. So when we do flying pizzicato, we are engaging in what we call bilateral movement. So bilateral movement just means the body moves one way, the arm moves the other way. So two side to side motion. So bi is two, lateral means side to side. And that is as opposed to unilateral motion when the body and the bow move in the same direction. And bilateral motion is helpful for those accelerated bow strokes as we explored just a second ago. So I'm just going to practice shifting my weight from the middle. So again, you want to be shoulder width apart. So from neutral to slightly over the left foot. I can be a little bit shorter in the middle and a little bit taller at the when I shift my weight to the left foot. And my left knee is going to bend over my left foot. So neutral, so shorter, taller, shorter, taller, neutral, left foot, and keep the knees bent. What is not is twisting. We're not twisting like this. You can have a little bit of twisting, but not much. It's not the main action here. We're just shifting weight from one foot to another. You don't also want to lift your foot off the ground. My heel might ever so slightly lift off when I'm doing this motion, but I do not lift my foot fully. Next, I'm going to take my right arm and I'm going to find those floating shoulders again. You can find that space in your armpits so that you have these floating arms. And you can even think of if you were in a pool of water and the water level was here, like how would your arm be if it was floating? It would just be like this, right? Just buoyant. And we're going to cast the arm to the right, like it's going to, you might see the elbow, it's going to draw a smile ever so slightly, and then back. So you can do this without your feet for a moment just to get the correct motion. So you can find that buoyant arm and then pretend that a stream is carrying your arm out this way, and then you're going to create this rainbow back. So you're going to smile, rainbow. So it's a down bow and then rebound. So when we're bowing, we are making arc shapes because our joints move in arc shape, and there are ways that we compensate for this, and we'll talk about that later. Also, I find it helpful for extending the arm is if you can release to an OK sign. I think a common thing is to press the wrist out like this, and that's really uncomfortable and it doesn't allow me to reach the full length of my bow if I was to do this, and it's just not as comfortable. So I'm going to release my hand to this kind of OK sign. So I'm going to smile and then rainbow. Smile, rainbow. And you also don't want to cast your arm back here because, again, we want to practice a bow that's going to be parallel to the bridge. We don't have our instruments now, so you can just approximate. For me, because my violin's not totally to my left, I'm not reaching all the way out in front of my belly button, but maybe 45 degrees away from my body. But if you have the tendency to do this, then it's good to do an therapeutic exaggeration in which you actually just go ahead and cast your arm in front of your belly button. And usually when people have the tendency to do this and they try to do this, they end up with this, which is the correct trajectory for the arm. So now you can put this together. So we're starting in neutral with your buoyant arm in the middle. And I'm going to just make my OK sign out here and get taller towards my left foot and then back. So opposite, together. You can also take your left hand and place it on your right collarbone and try the same movement, but just noticing the movement from your collarbone. So also a common mistake is to limit the movement to here, and then you get this very small motion here when students have mismapped their arms to start here. So your collarbone moves up and down. So it's moving up and down. So you can just notice that. And also you can notice your scapula moving. Once you're comfortable with this, or sometimes it's just better to get a little bit more information by actually just trying it with your instrument. And again, you want to place your fingers in fourth position, your hand on your index finger on your button, and you're going to place your violin on your collarbone. If you don't have quite the right setup yet, then you don't need to touch your chin rest. If you have a chin rest that's too short, just don't touch it. Just keep your head on top of your AO joint. We're not shifting up and down at the moment, so you don't really need, you can do the correct motion with some concentration, even if you don't have the right equipment. In order to do a flying pizzicato, I'm going to take the pad at my thumb, the first phalange of my thumb, and place it like thumbs down, the edge of my fingerboard like this. And I want to, when I do this flying pizzicato, the best sound is going to be in between the two stop points of my instrument. So my stop point is here and here. So the middle is here. And that's where I'm going to get the best sound. Here, not a great sound. Here it's also not a great sound. The middle is going to be the great sound. The midpoint here, you place your thumb. Your thumb is going to go slightly behind your index finger, and then you take the pad of your index finger again, and make sure that you have a buoyant arm and pretend that it's floating in water. You can just let it float up or float down, whichever way is easier for you. And we're going to start in a neutral stance, so shoulder width apart again, knees slightly bent. You want to be breathing. And we're going to then just smile and rainbow. So I'm going to start in neutral with my knees ever so slightly bent. I'm getting a little bit taller and back to shorter. And I'm also smiling with my right arm and then creating a rainbow back. So when we're doing flying pizzicato, you might observe that we're not plucking with the finger, but we're actually plucking with the elbow. The elbow leads this motion, and actually the elbow is the impetus for many of our bow strokes. And we are also tracing an elliptical shape with our arm. So if you follow my finger and you attach a pencil to the end of my finger or even the end of my elbow, you'll see that it's creating an elliptical shape. So make sure that your thumb is in this nook, that you're shifting the weight from neutral. We start at neutral and then we go over to the left foot. We are starting shorter and getting taller. Our violin is more tilted to begin with and flattens. We're getting shorter and taller again. And you want to check the direction of your pizzicato too. So we don't want something like this. That's not going to end up helping us practice something parallel to the bridge. So I think it's more likely to have success drawing a straight flying pizzicato when you release your hand either to an open hand or an OK sign. Either one's okay. But you just don't want to leave your hand like this. That tends to end up with this bent wrist like this. Or this is a little bit painful. So I'm going to release to that OK sign. If you still find yourself casting your arm this way, then try therapeutic exaggeration, which is to overdo it in this way. Cast it out right in front of your belly button. And then see if you can. And usually when students who do this, then aim to do this, then the trajectory becomes correct. And again, you want a floating arm. You don't want an arm that's like this. You can see that I can't really breathe properly like this. You want your rib muscles and your ribs to be free. So you want a buoyant arm. It's almost like that current. Your arm is flowing and a current is just sweeping your arm out like this. And as you're doing this, make sure to keep your head free. Sometimes it's helpful for us upper string players to try things the cello or bass way. So we can, without our instruments first, find this almost stirring the pot motion, so the hand kind of smiles towards me and then back out like this. And I'm going to shift my weight from one sit bone to the other, so from neutral with my weight on both sit bones to the weight on the left sit bone and back. And again, I can still release to that OK sign to just allow my arm to extend without this this kind of painful bend in the wrist. And this extension is very apt because it's basically what my bow hold is going to look like when I actually hold the bow at the tip, like this. So when I go to the tip, this is what enables my bow to stay straight, my joints move in round ways, and what corrects that crooked arc shape is another crooked arc shape. So if my arm is going this way, then my bow is gonna need to pivot in my hand like this, which looks like that OK sign. Let's try that with our violins, violas, or cellos or basses. And I'm just gonna put the instrument here. And again, I'm sitting as if I could stand. I'm gonna pluck with my elbow. I'm gonna smile towards me and back. And you wanna make sure that as you're doing this, you're feeling that motion from your collarbone. A lot of times students can do this, in which they've mapped out the beginning of their arm is starting here. You just want to make sure that the collarbone is able to move up and down, or in this case, in the cello bass way, forward and back. And Paul Rolland liked to make this flying pizzicato a musical experience, so you can either sing, play, or play a recording of in New Tunes for Strings or Barcarolle is a very common piece to play with this. So end up like this. Thanks for joining me in this video. If you'd like to learn more or you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me through my email, and I will be happy to answer your questions or direct you to even more Paul Rolland videos.